Hi there, I am Adem Kirbas. I am here in Turkey in Ordu. It is July. I hope you all are doing fine. We are still in the pandemic and that you will take care of yourself. Today we will continue with male culturalism, this cultural gender of man. The time we only some sort of analyze the perspective of migrants. I, I do admit the this is only the perspective of migrants of black of blackness and how we should consider blackness. This is like I said a bit different, and we have to consider this in a separate episode because it is very important because of its act it's because of recent events as well as of its different development, and it deserves special scrutiny. However, and today we will talk about male gender, male culturalism from a white European perspective. I will occasionally use whiteness and being European synonymously. They are interchangeable because no matter what those Americans, what white Americans think of themselves, they are descendants of white Europeans. These are descendants of white European culture, and this is I will and it is European culture for a fact, and I will partially use them synonymously. However, we have to talk before we go into detail. We have to talk about a little bit of history because, like my understanding is that no belief whatsoever can be pure imagination. That is indeed every belief, every assumption is partially founded in reality, and this is not different with whiteness because whiteness does not come from anywhere. It has its foundation in history, in our daily lives. We have to be aware that half of a millennia, this was the history of 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 white dominance on the globe, and to this very day, European or white European, they are the ruling elite. If you want, they are still rule the world. So history, if you want, is to part history of of whiteness and Europeans in TV, pop culture, and so on. I mean, of course, one of the reasons why whiteness is so far spread is because of the invention of pictures, is because of of imagery, and this imagery came into existence, especially with paintings and later on with the book print. Other cultures like Islam, for example, did had or have a different approach to pictures. It is rather forbidden. So this goes back to Platonism. Platon was an ardent advocate of or an enemy of every pictures because he thought it would some sort of corrupt someone's mind and it would deceive someone and would lead him to wrong paths, especially this idea, and that you no matter what can never decipher or some sort of manifest the idea in reality. This has its origin in Platonism. However, we have to be aware of one thing, that Europe and European powers conquered, destroyed, annexed almost the entire world. This starts with European conquest of the Americas, as well as in Africa, and then later Asia. Well, before Africa, it was Asia actually. However, and this led to the belief that being European means being white, as well as it is being used synonymously with being superior to other uh, cultures, other traditions whatsoever. It was proven on the battlefield. The superior army has won. This is something we find in the antiquity as well. Alexandros or Alexander the Great's army, they were actually not real Greeks, rather Macedonians, however, but they won over this vastly Persian army, and thus they proved themselves and the world that they are superior, and that their culture in effect are superior. And like we said it before, many of these understandings of the East uh, comes from ancient Greeks. Also, how the ancient Greek portrayed Persians and barbarians. This is still the case today. This is still, we pretty much, the world whiteness as well as Europeans pretty much use these perspectives on others, like the ancient Greeks did. I mean, it is indeed worth asking why. How could this happen? Because you have to be aware of one thing, that Europe was pretty much the backwaters of civilization. I mean, back in the days, especially with the rise of Islam, the Islam were very prosperous society, but as well as China, you could say the Chinese as well as Indian economy were far more sophisticated than the European economies. And up to the eve of the Opium Wars, Europe had nothing to offer to the Chinese people but drugs. So the Chinese economy was superior, as well as would always make surpluses compared to others. So all this silver, Spanish silver from the New World, would be imported to China, and then exchanged for silk and other goods. And this silk then the Spaniards would sell in Europe. So China was the dominating power. However, how could Europe, this is conquer a very sophisticated culture? This is the same question in the antiquity, because Greece was way more sophisticated than Rome, and the Romans pretty much took over Greek culture. So the Roman culture, you cannot think of Roman culture independently of Greek culture. Yet this Roman force, this Roman power could conquer Greece, this higher developed civilization. And this was partially true for Europeans. But one thing was of course that the world, some sort of the industrial revolution, was the initiation, you could say, of European dominance in the world, and its technological development, because then technological development happened faster, and it was more predictable. It had some sort of normal cycles, like a product cycles. You could depend on it. But however, what is I think way more important is that Europe was a very bloody continent. Wars would happen there very commonly. So if you know a bit of history, then you know that in Europe, the most of the wars were fought in Europe. Europe was constant in war, and through these constant wars, Europe became very much sophisticated in warfare in comparison to China. China had some very phases in its history, where one of them was these four kingdoms, and these were the phases where there people would stage constant war against each other, but yet these stages or phases ended, and then you could see in partially that China would turn to pacifism. They would even destroy weapons and so on. So whereas in Europe every technological development was used on the battlefield, was used some sort of to get an overedge of your enemy on the battlefield. In Europe's issues and problems, they were solved on the battlefield. This may help you to understand why a culture which you could say was inferior to other cultures at that time, especially in Asia, how could they in the end conquer world empires? This was the case with the Huns. The Huns conquered a lot of empire, as well as the Mongols. The Mongols conquered China, despite the fact that they were not as much as civilized as Chinese, and as well as other cultures. However, and from this, we talked about this, the male gender, especially of Europeans, derived from a soldier ethos, some sort of being, or the military was for a long time some sort of the role model, how a European man should behave and conduct himself. This started in the antiquity, you could say partially in Greece, later in the Roman Empire. The Romans, they were thrown through a very militaristic society. You could see in Greece this simplistic lifestyle we talked about, is the obedient, unison, and so on. And this was always in separation to others, to barbarians. And Europeans were very violent, and this is despite the fact that Europeans themselves never really considered themselves as violent, as barbarians. Nevertheless, someone else and would have considered them as barbarians. For example, when the Spanish conquistadors came to the New World, they were partially revered as gods, true, but nevertheless, as well as very violent, greedy, because they all wanted to have gold and so on. Because the self-understanding of Europeans was actually being superior, being civilized. Again, you have to be aware of one thing. I mean, if you win on the battlefield, you may be a barbarian, whatever. Nevertheless, this is a fact, and this proves, and especially if you win outnumbered, then this has indeed a very effect on to your psyche, but as well as technological advancement and so on. But of course, one asks, or should ask himself here, why did those Europeans some sort of use violence, and we all know about atrocities Europeans committed in Africa, in the New World, in Asia.